here with Lynn Seppala from Castlewood, South Dakota. He's had just a fantastic life, just huge interest, but also some challenges along the way. And so, Lynn, I'd like you to just kind of tell me your story first, and what are some of the things that you've accomplished in your life?
Well, I started out in Castlewood, South Dakota on a small farm, top of my class. Of course, there's only 32 people. But I went to South Dakota State University and then on to physics, a bachelor, and then on to University of Rochester, where I studied optics with some of the great people at that time. And I eventually went to Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, and I've been involved in some of the largest optical systems built in the world. Actually, one time I was doing 3 of the largest projects at the same time. It was, for a small town guy in a farm in the middle of South Dakota, I thought it was pretty spectacular, But I think what I did is I took the chance to do something, and I sort of credit my farmer's background, where my father at 6 o'clock says, okay, at 12 boys, you're going to milk the cows today, and that was it, So there was no thought about, it's too hard or too difficult or too cold. You did what you needed to do.
And out of that effort, there's been some amazing things. Like, tell me about the 192 laser igniter.
Well, the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory was built to study nuclear weapons, and specifically the atomic, the hydrogen bomb.
Okay.
And so we've been involved in all kinds of research in terms of nuclear fission and fusion. And when we started in 1995 or so, saying no more underground testing, we had to switch to doing it in the laboratory. Well, our laboratory is a 10-story building, 5 stories up, 5 stories in the ground. It's big enough so you could put 3 football fields side by side by side.
Wow.
And there's 192 laser beam. They're square, but roughly about the same size as this table. And they all go into a 10-meter diameter vacuum chamber and onto a tiny pellet that hopefully will heat up to the temperature of the sun and cause hydrogen to fuse into helium and create some energy. So this has been a 40-year goal, and we're getting close where we got the first slight bit of, we call burning, where we actually got more energy out than we put in. But it's still a long ways to go.
Wow.
And I was involved in a lot of the optics in beam transport, diagnostic, alignment. But these were all single element lens, one wavelength. And I had a chance in 2001, after I had my stroke, to be involved in the optical design of the world's largest light gathering telescope. So I always say doing small lenses, one wavelength, qualified me eminently to do. But what I did is I decided after my stroke, I have a chance to do it, and by golly, I'm going to do it, And if I fail, I fail, but I'm never going to go back and say I should have done that.
So even after a stroke, about midway in your career,
that's right.
You've come back now, and you're getting ready it's ready to come online with a huge optic in Chile. Is that right?
They built the observatory.
Okay.
All the mechanical structures, all the frames. They've got the mirrors in place. And now they got to put the camera, which is the size of a small VW bus. So it's very complex. And
wow.
But I always think, when I went to the University of Rochester, I was pretty smart, top of my class. But I went to SDSU, and there were some a lot smarter. And then I went to University of Rochester, and there were people really smart, So a lot of times I sort of said I don't belong, I'm just a small people, and I don't have the qualification. But I think you have to learn to accept what you are, and try as hard as you can, and don't worry about what other people think, and don't don't judge yourself too harshly. If you think you can do it, give it a try. I think the worst thing would be to be in your late career and say, I should have tried that. I wish I'd done that. And that's,
Yeah.
you can always fail
Yep.
many times, but the time you succeed is something will last forever.
So, tell me a little bit about, the tenacity that it took to come back and decide that, I'm not going to listen to the doctors. I'm going to kind of...
Well, it's interesting because I had a stroke, like I said, in 1992.
Mhm.
And my first, I think I was probably unconscious for a day or two. And when I woke up, we started doing some therapy, and a person held up a toothbrush, and I knew what it was. I couldn't say toothbrush. I couldn't dial a telephone, because I couldn't, the numbers didn't make any sense.
Hmm.
And I knew my numbers, like 447, so I had to do 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. But then you lose track, so it was very difficult. But I think with my wife, with my family, with my support group from the lab, they always thought I could do it. And so I had this incredible support team to do it. So, but I was like it back in first grade. I remember the first month after I was in the hospital, the occupational therapist was going to just balance my checkbook, just as an exercise, and I couldn't do it, And so she sort of terminated the meeting and said, "Why don't you go back to the room?" Well, I went back to the room and I sort of said, so I can't add and subtract. What can I do? But I realized I could do cosine identities, which is a trigonometry.
Right.
And so I said, I can do that. So later on that day, my wife came. I told her the story. We talked to a neurologist later that evening, and he said, well, maybe you should try to find another career. Well, my career is physics and optics. That's not an option. And my wife is determined. She wasn't about to let me try to find another career.
Yeah.
So I had to go back literally to kindergarten, learning how to write with my left hand. I'm right-handed, so that wasn't even a good break. So, and I had to do word games, crossword puzzles. Someone from work gave me a chess set, but I couldn't figure out how to put the batteries. So it was, but through all that, especially the first 3 or 4 months, it was like something new and exciting. It was like you were a child again, learning how to do things, and it was like, okay, you got to figure out how to do this. But I'd say 6 months into the stroke, I started getting depressed, because I realized that this isn't going to go away. I lost the right arm. I cannot use it, period. And I was getting depressed every time I went to work on my arm. I got even more depressed. So finally I said, Beth, this is, I'm not going to do this anymore. And she looked stunned. I said, it's only an arm, let me get on with something I can do. I don't want to spend time doing something that will never work out. I'm a scientist, so I sort of plotted the progress, and it was straight line. And so, but my wife understood, and she one night took me into the library, and she laid my head on her lap, and she just says, stroke my head, and just said, cry, bawl, and I just broke down, bawling harder than I've ever done since I was maybe 2 years old.
Yeah.
And something clicked, and I said, if I can do that, I can do anything. If I can just realize that, don't worry about what's happening a year from now. Can I get through the next day? And something clicked, and I went back. We started. I told my therapist we're going to go skiing. I had a doctor friend who was an Olympic skier, and he was the first guy that said, Lynn, this is a tragedy, but we're going to get back to skiing. Now I was in a wheelchair, and I said, crazy Ralph, yeah, he's right, But I started to do it, and I said, I told my therapist we're going to go skiing, and he said that's a crazy idea. But we started out on a slope that you could barely move, and I fell at both turns, left turn, fall. Ski instructor put me up, right turn, fall. And, but we did, again, baby steps, and within 3 years I was skiing things like extrovert, tourist trap.
Oh, wow.
Sometimes falling, sometimes taking a big tumble, but,
Yeah.
But I survived. I had a great teacher, and so I think it's just, you can never say you can't do it. I mean, you have to try. I mean, that's the first thing. If you say it's too hard, you've lost already. You have to say I can try, and many times you'll fail.
Yep. You're just kind of the epitome of the saying that it's not. Excuse me. It's not how many times you fall. It's how many times you get back up. Right. And that's just the tenacity that you have. And so it was after that then that was it afterwards that you studied dark matter and those types of things and came up with these other optics, or?
And that was after my stroke, right? Mm-hmm. So I've actually been involved slightly in the Hubble telescope, realizing there was something wrong.
Okay.
And I did a little bit, but I always regretted that I could have done more. I could have brought in more people, but I was a little bit shy and a little bit reserved, so I didn't do what I could have done. Mm-hmm. And so when I have this opportunity, I said I'm gonna do what I can. So I got the funding, and I spent 6 months studying it, and then there's another 2 years, and it's something I was uncomfortable with doing it, but I said I'm going to do it, and things worked out.
They certainly did. You look back and you have all these scientific achievements that you have, but as you look back, what do you think is your greatest accomplishment?
I would say mentally and physically recovering from the stroke. It was devastating. I mean, but then technically, I think it was the Large Synoptic Survey Telescope, which is now called the Vera C. Rubin Telescope.
Okay.
I was way out on a limb, going way beyond what I knew, but it was as if I was back in a stroke where you just put one step forward and don't worry about what's going to happen. So I learned to take their design, study for 6 months, and try to find something better.
For us laypersons, what exactly is that the name you just said?
It was the Vera C. Rubin Telescope now.
Okay.
Observatory. Vera C. Rubin Observatory.
And is that the one in Chile?
Yeah, it's going to be in Chile, in the Atacama Desert.
Okay.
8,500 feet above sea level.
And it's like an 8.4 meter optic or something?
27 feet in diameter.
Wow.
It's a 3.2 billion pixel camera.
Okay.
All right. So the field of view is as if it was the width is 7 moon diameter. So it's a huge, huge field of view.
Wow.
It'll be the world's largest light gathering instrument. And so just to be a part of it, to be lucky enough to be a small-time boy from Castle, South Dakota.
Absolutely.
To be in this position. But I realized that a lot of people are like me. They come from a small town. Mm-hmm. They worked hard, and they did it. And people think you have to be to Stanford, Harvard to do something. Well, that's not the case. If you work hard, follow your dreams, enjoy what you're doing.
Yep.
I don't think I ever at the lab found there was one day where I wasn't anxious to go to work.
Yeah.
So my one suggestion would be find something you love, and if it doesn't pay a lot, find some way to make it pay. Because I would say don't ever do something you don't like to do. It's not. It's a waste of time. You're not doing good to yourself, your family, or the world if you don't love to do what you're doing. I was blessed to have a good wife, a good work, good people around me, and I've just been so fortunate to be where I am today.
Well, it's just fantastic, and your story is just incredible. And you've kind of laid out, kind of what some advice you'd give young people. But is there anything else that you would tell, that young person that's in Castlewood? They just had a catastrophic tornado in the town and so forth. What would you tell them? As they're sitting there, kind of anything you'd add to your advice?
I think it's a big world out there. You'll find interesting people. Be open to them. I mean, when I grew up, it was Finns, Swedes, and Norwegian with a bit of German, and that was it. So you're going to find people of all colors, of all racial background, all religion, all sexual persuasion, and you have to learn these are people. Right. They're just like you and I, and take what you can get from them, learn from them, and don't ever judge harshly somebody by their height, face of color, religion, or anything like that. It's a wide world, and the wider you can make yourself, the better off you are.
Yeah, that's so true. And I know you're also doing some work with stroke and treatments. Can you just say a little bit about it?
Yeah. When I had my stroke in 1992, I was able to go to the nearest hospital. But now, 5 years ago, I couldn't have gone to the hospital because it wasn't a certified stroke care center.
Okay.
So I would have to go miles away to find a hospital. So we instituted a fundraising campaign to get our local hospital to be a certified stroke care center, and we had to raise $1 million, and we matched some of the funds, but I've had now at least 3 people who said thank you for saving my life, because they had a stroke, they went in, they got this stroke busting drug, and 2 days later they walked out and they're completely normal. So that's one of the things we tried to do, is to try to lessen the amount of damage by just making treatment available. And then just within the last 6 months, that was great for people, recover fully, but there are still people who have severe strokes who need much more care and support. So for the last 6 months, we had a stroke care center involved to be now a monthly support group where we have anywhere from 6 to 12 people talking about their life, their medicines, their feeling, how they're feeling, and I act as an example of someone who could have a stroke and be a successful person, and so I find it very encouraging just to see some people just had a stroke, and to give some encouragement, to say, stick with it, you'll be okay.
Lynn, this has been just fantastic, and I can't think of a more inspiring person to talk to. And not only that, but just a humble, down-to-earth guy. I really appreciate you taking the time and just sitting and chatting with me a little bit today. And I look forward to hopefully continuing these conversations with you at some point. So,
well, thank you.